What's up, guys? It's Jack, and welcome back to the arcade. So in this one, I want to name 10 of my favorite and most nostalgic arcade games that I played growing up. Now, obviously, not every single one of these is a fighting game, not by not by at least a decent shot. But there were other games of so many different genres, as well as impacts that had on me from the time I was 8 years old up until around my early to mid teens or something like that. So I didn't just want to limit it to fighting games, even though fighting games of the 90s and even the early 2000s were something. But with that being said, there are other games out there that certainly deserve the love because of the impact that they had, as well as the nostalgia factor, and just how some games on this list were also underrated and underappreciated that ended up having a cult following later on. And as usual, just because I name something first doesn't mean it's the best, and just because I name something last isn't the worst, and or vice versa. But, maybe you can consider thinking deeper into that once you see the list. Now, the first one on the list is House of the Dead. House of the Dead is the ultimate co-op shooter, man. It was, you have a big screen TV, you got a whole bunch of zombies that are trying to get you in so many different ways, and you and hopefully another friend basically co-op it, and you try to get as far as possible. And it always, if there was any game that you never had enough quarters for, it was House of the Dead and its sequels as well. But one thing I've never seen though is I've always wanted to see it, but I've never seen it. I never seen one person use both guns at the same time and playing it solo. I'm sure there's somebody out there that's done it. I mean, hell, I might even look that up on YouTube and see if it exists after recording this. But yeah, House of the Dead, easily one of the most nostalgic and greatest arcade games ever. All right, next up, how in the world can you think of a sports arcade game without talking about NBA Jam, man? NBA Jam was very, very popular, and it was also during the time where, the NBA was also at a very, very magical type of state if you were a basketball fan and you were watching it. And basically all of the things about fantasy basketball, so to speak, was kind of brought to life with NBA Jam. You can get the players that can jump extremely high, they can be on fire, the ball can be on fire, the ball would be on fire, and the net would burn and stuff like that. It was the ultimate casual sports game. One of the most ultimate casual sports games in terms of first. And it sold very well on console, if I remember correctly. I remember like all my friends had a copy of NBA Jam at some point, and it was a lot of fun, and it was addictive. And the sound of that game, and specifically in the arcade, was awesome. And you always wanted to dunk, no matter what. You never wanted to just shoot, you just wanted to dunk. And the only time you did want to shoot is if the ball was on fire, because you were guaranteed that it would go in. All right, so yeah, NBA Jam, hands down one of the greatest. And next up, there was no way I was going to mention a sports game without this one, NFL Blitz. NFL Blitz is easily, for me personally, the most addictive sports game that I've ever played in an arcade cabinet. And it's even better when you and a friend, or just somebody else that you don't even know, are playing against each other on that, man. And you could, like slam people, kind of like in wrestling, like a leg drop and stuff like that. It was like the NFL on steroids, but it was part of the game, but they managed to make it addictive, which was freaking awesome. NFL Blitz is nostalgia to the max. One of the greatest ever to ever exist. Next up is actually a car game that is not a racing game, but in its own unique way, it might as well be. Crazy Taxi. Crazy Taxi, I played that when I was in my mid-teens, and the arcade that was close to home actually had it, and it was one of those games to where you were always in the mood to try and see if you could get farther and farther and farther and last longer and last longer and last. And Crazy Taxi is easily like probably overall the most addictive type of car game that's not a racing game that you can play. And in ways it was even more addictive than racers, because it was just unique and it had a sense of humor and it was ultimately casual. And for some reason, people always loved just to watch that game as opposed to just playing it as well. People would gather around sometimes and just watch other people play, especially if somebody made it really far. But yeah, Crazy Taxi, very, very awesome game. A lot of fun. All right, next up, how in the world can you talk about the arcades, especially if it was a game of the 90s, without talking about the Ninja Turtles? Turtles in Time was one of the best arcade cabinets in terms of a design standpoint, in terms of the look, and you've got 4 joysticks out there, and the 4 sets of buttons, and You know, everybody that played could pick one of their own turtles, and you try to co-op it together and to beat it. And that arcade was a pain in the ass, because I played it on the Cowabunga collection, the arcade version, not the SNES version. And let me tell you, Turtles in Time on the arcade was hard as hell. And in the arcade version, you didn't have unlimited continues unless you had all the money in the world. So I'm willing to bet that it is one of the most profitable arcade cabinets ever, because of the difficulty, as well as the fact that it was irresistible. You were a kid and you could play as the Ninja Turtles. Yeah, Turtles in Time, one of the greatest ever to ever do it. And of course, the next one on my list is a game that actually ended up making it to the N64 when it came out, and it's another racing game, and that is Cruis'n USA. Cruis'n USA, there was just something about Cruis'n USA in terms of how it controlled, because it was very casual. It wasn't like a simulator, right? That was fairly easy to control, and then the music just kept you playing. And obviously, if you won first place, you were able to continue on, so to speak, right? As far as the arcade is concerned, if you got anything beyond first, I think you had to enter quarters, if I'm not mistaken, and to keep going. So for a lot of people, I don't know how far they would make it. I mean, the first time, if you were familiar with the game and you did the first track, you would probably win first place. But then after that, it would get considerably harder to continue on. So I'm sure somebody out there might have completed it in crazy fashion, but Cruis'n USA was a very, very type of nostalgic arcade experience, which is yet again another reason why I made the list. All right, now to the final four. Here we go. This one, there's no way I'm not mentioning it. Killer Instinct, man. Killer Instinct came out in the mid 90s, and it was at a time when Mortal Kombat reigned supreme. Mortal Kombat was reigning supreme at the time, and Killer Instinct comes out, and it got your attention by ear first, and then you took a look at it and you were like, holy crap, this game looks great, it sounds terrific, it's a new fighting game on the block, and it's actually good, and yet it's also actually crazy, and it's even got a little bit of Mortal Kombat in there. The soundtrack is bananas, so good. Like, Killer Instinct managed to do the impossible of releasing in the mid 90s, in 1994, when Mortal Kombat was reigning supreme, and obviously Street Fighter 2 was reigning supreme as well. And yet this game not only managed to survive, but thrive, and to also build a cult following for years to come. Killer Instinct is one of the greatest to ever exist, period. All right, next up, I have to give my flowers to this game. It is an unlikely game, but I'm giving my flowers to it because I loved it, and that's Primal Rage. Primal Rage is basically Mortal Kombat, but a little bit more limited, and obviously the gameplay being different, but with dinosaurs. Dinosaurs and some other unique creatures. And it certainly had the violence factor and the blood and gore, and it even had the finishers. And, you know, it just goes to show you, with the popularity of games like Mortal Kombat and with Killer Instinct, and of course fighting games in general, they came out with something crazy. And Primal Rage is to me one of the most nostalgic, underrated, not underrated from a technical standpoint, but just I feel like only people of my time appreciated it for what it was. But at the same time, even back then, it was kind of underappreciated because it wasn't on the same level as some of the other games. But to me, as a kid, when I first played that game, I think I was 10 years old or 9 years old, it was great. Primal Rage is, to me, pure fighting game nostalgia. And for those of you guys that played it back in the day, you'll understand why. I can't put it all into words, but Primal Rage, in my opinion, deserves, its flowers. All right, top two. And of course, this is my personal favorite fighting game to ever exist, Mortal Kombat 2. I had to pick something from the Mortal Kombat franchise, and the answer was easily Mortal Kombat 2, because to this day, Mortal Kombat 2 has had the biggest impact upon release, more than any other Mortal Kombat game, hands down. When Mortal Kombat 2 came out, it obviously blew the first one out of the water, and it surpassed everybody's expectations and imaginations, including yours truly. And everybody that was into fighting games got sucked into this game. MK2 is such a great accomplishment from a technical standpoint, as well as a franchise standpoint, because Mortal Kombat 2 set the tone for what the rest of the franchise would end up being. And ever since then, it didn't have that type of tone that MK2 provided. Obviously, every game is a little bit different, but MK2's tone, in terms of the lore, in terms of the sound, the better, how much better it was than the original, etc., etc., sets it apart from so many other fighting games, in my opinion, including in the series. And when it comes to the classic MK games, Mortal Kombat 2 is my game. That is my preferred game out of all of them. And I love them all, but MK2 stands out head and shoulders above the rest of classic games, in my opinion. And of course, number one, absolutely needs no introduction. The one that I wanted to mention last before ending was Street Fighter 2, man. Street Fighter 2 put fighting games on the map. Street Fighter 2 was popular with both kids and adults. Street Fighter 2 is so great, right? From a legendary and legacy standpoint, that people that are not even familiar with video games, let alone fighting games, know Street Fighter 2. And they'll always mention something about Street Fighter 2 because they've heard it and it just stuck with them, despite the fact that they're not even gamers. We're talking Hadouken, Shoryuken, like every single person who's ever heard those sounds in a Street Fighter 2 game, right, that isn't even into video games, but they know somebody who is, they will remember Street Fighter 2. The greatest fighting game of all time, in my opinion, from a legacy standpoint, is Street Fighter 2, hands down. And it is also, because of that, one of the greatest arcades to ever exist. Now that concludes my list. If there's anything here on this list, if there's any game specifically that didn't make this list specifically, let me know down in the comment section. And of course, a few of your memories of that game. And of course, if a game really does resonate with you that was on this list, please let me know down in the comment section a brief word about how you feel about this game, whether it's nostalgia, whether it's whatever it is. Tell me your story, and I'd love to hear it. So with that being said, thank you all for taking the time to watch and or listen. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.